Okay, so tonight I want to talk about the meaning of worshiping Christ as the Word, and I want to think about this sort of as a series. So if this vibes with you guys, then I want to do this every week. And I really want to explore the idea of truth in Christianity, because I think that we spend so much time, and I'm going to make a comment on this later, we spend so much time in this concept of love and how to feel and the nature of emotion in the context of Christianity, because in some sense we're using religion as a sort of panacea, I think, these days. We're not really trying to understand its role and its function in our lives, that we sort of lose sight of, I think, sort of the deeper aspects of it. But, I mean, that's my opinion, okay? So, again, this is probably going to offend people. I don't care. And maybe I'll swear, and I'm going to try not to, but forgive me if I do. Alrighty. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about how we're even approaching this, because I think, we're kind of taking a radical departure from what we normally do in, say, a Bible study, or what we normally do in, a typical approach of looking at religious context and religious stuff. That I just want to talk a little bit about how I'm thinking about this, so that you guys can have it framed in your mind as to where I'm trying to go. And so at the very bottom, how I want to think about this is basically this exposition that I'm doing to you guys tonight. The way that I'm presenting this is me trying to embody Christ, and I'm trying to point to that, right? And so I'm trying to say the meaning of Christ, the meaning of having the Spirit in you, is what I'm trying to do to you tonight. And I also want to talk about how to represent that on the board, or when you're talking to your friends, or I don't know what you do for fun. You know what I'm saying. Anyways, okay, so the first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about the nature of the method of analysis as being scientific. Now, when we talk about the notion of science, usually what we mean is something nebulous and stupid, quite frankly, where we don't really know what we mean by science. We say things like follow the science and trust the science and this is the science and literature and all the experts and all these sorts of things, right? But the fact of the matter is that we're all endowed with the same method of understanding. We don't have any good reason. Well, I have good reason, but I would suppose those people don't have good reason to think as to why they're a virologist or a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, as opposed to something else, right? And the reason why I say, for example, mathematicians are so successful in a broad range of scientific fields is because they have this very general type of understanding. And so what I want to say is that the nature of science is to really think about things in this general way, to sort of postulate hypotheses, to say, I have an idea about how things are, and I want to orient myself towards the world in such a way to try and check to see if that thing is true, okay? So the contents of this scientific method are essentially things that I call imagistic representatives. Now, that sounds like a fancy term. It literally just means sequences of ideas, but these ideas are more strictly something like symbols. And what a symbol is something that comes upon us that induces an emotional response in us. For example, if you go to the Sistine Chapel and you look up at the chapel ceiling and you see the painting, and then you're overwhelmed with this emotion, this awe of this great work, then this thing is reflecting back at you something that is what a symbol is. Okay, it's something much deeper. It's not just an idea, it's something much deeper than that. And I'm sure you guys have had experiences where, either in physics or in religion, where you come, or maybe in something else, where you come upon something and you find it so, perhaps beautiful is the right word, that it overwhelms you, right? And so what I want to do is I really want to think about the nature of science to be sequences of these things, okay? And the way that I draw this, I just draw it sort of like this. It's like you have a symbol like this, and then you can have symbols that sort of live under it, and then ones that live under it like this, right? And then you can go sort of like this, or like this, or like this. And so basically it's if I want to do analysis on a system, or for example, I'm pushing this block on this table like this, and I think about the forces that push on it, things like that, then what I do is I begin with the intuition of what the thing is. I'm pushing the block on the table. Then I think about, okay, well, what can I break this down into, right? And you have Newton's laws and so on and so forth, right? So I start with the block, and then I have a bunch of initial ideas about how to approach analysis of the system, and then those things lead to other ideas. But these ideas always have this sort of idea of truth in them, right? There's something in it that's trying to orient us, okay? There's something in it that's like inherently, well, I would suppose that the right word is sacred about these things, okay? And it reflects back at us like the true nature of that thing, right? And what I mean by what I mean by scientific is I'm orienting myself towards this whole work, this whole life in this way, right? Like I'm here trying to expose to you the fundamental truth, and I'm trying to embody that. And that's what I mean by scientific. Okay? Questions? Okay, very good. You guys aren't giving me looks of I don't know, bewilderment or anything like that. So
pretty straight.
Good, very good.
The only thing that seemed weird to me would perhaps be the embodiment, and more specifically, what you mean by that.
Okay.
It just seemed a little too.
No. Let's. This is a very good digression. So the idea of embodiment here is, like, I'm trying to take seriously. Okay, so here's the thing, right? You have a philosophy about life, right? And your philosophy about life says certain things about the way the world is, right? Now, you could, let me get an eraser because I don't know how far over here I can go, and I don't really need this anymore. You know.
By embodiment means to take and consider with the seriousness that you'd approach like a religious textbook.
Yes,
okay,
yes,
great.
but in every aspect of your life, right?
Yeah.
And so if I break this down sort of like this, and I say, well, this is my philosophy, right, and then this is me. You know, in one sense, you could say, well, this thing is sort of outside of me. It's like a set of ideas, and it's not clear to me how this thing affects me at all. You know, it's just sort of, well, you know, I'm in the shower and I like to think about the sun sometimes. Or I'm in the shower and I like to think about, you know, why did that happen that one time, or something like this, right? But, you know, okay, so if I go back to this picture like this, of these sort of sequences of thoughts like this, it's like you get to this point and then you stop, right? And instead of continuing down and going farther to really develop this structure, you just stop there. There's a guy whose name is Brouwer that you guys don't need to worry about. He has an idea about this. This thing is called sterilization. Basically, the sequences of these ideas, it's like you stop instead of continuing into the process, right? So if I have something like this, it's really not clear to me how this affects me in my day-to-day life. You know, like I have to do work. I have to eat. I have to go to the bathroom. I have to shower. I have to go to the gym. I have to do this. I have to do that. Oh my God, life is suffering. You know, and so you know, sometimes you get here and you stop, right? And then you think, well, that was a nice and cute little box. I'm going to put my ideas in. I mean, they're precious to me, and I won't tell them to anybody, but I'm not really going to take them seriously. Now, this is one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is saying, no, this is my life, right? Yeah, and that's what I'm saying, is that what I'm trying to do here is do that for you right now. Yes, integrity, you know, that sort of thing. Okay, good. That was a good digression. Thank you. Okay, so the other thing that I want to say about this is that there's two concepts due to Kant, which I was going to read, but well, I'm not going to. I changed my mind. I'm not going to read it. But there are two concepts due to Kant called analytic and synthetic, and it's basically in the context of him trying to explain how we understand things, okay? Now, imagine I have, well, say my water bottle in front of me like this, right? Now, there are things about this water bottle that are inherent to this water bottle that I can deduce on the basis of the fact that I'm looking at the water bottle and touching and feeling and so on and so forth, just the water bottle, okay? These properties live under the water bottle, and I deduce these things by means of analysis, and that's what I mean by analytic, okay? So this thing is like stuff under here, okay? And this is what I mean by expanded inwardly, right? You start with the thing in front of you, and you look into it, and you see its properties that live inside of it, okay? You know, like, I don't know, hardness, and blue, and who cares, other things, it doesn't matter. You get it, it's right there. The things outside of it are things that are contingent upon it, right? Like, for example, if I think about what it can do, then the things that it can do are things that depend upon it. You see what I'm saying? Right, like imagine I have some water over here. This thing can hold the water, right? So, I mean, the capacity, the fact that this thing is empty when there's no water in it is a property of this thing. But Like if I imagine, well, I need something that's going to fill my water bottle, or I need something that's going to hold my water. And then I have my water bottle. So the property of being able to hold the water is something that depends upon this thing rather than the other way around. Okay. I think that another good example of this is like if I just give you a cup, you can come up with a bunch of different ways to use the cup, right? And that's because you have a problem like, well, where am I going to put my pens? In the cup, right? But you don't, when I give you the cup, you're not thinking, I'm going to put my pens in the cup. You think, I'm going to put coffee in the cup or something like that. Yeah. That's called, I call that thing outward expansion. I mean, the technical terms that I use are introverted and extroverted differentiation. Those are technical terms that I use that are in reference to Jung's ideas. And I don't want to get into that right now.
So was we've moved on to the synthetic description?
No. Synthetic description is different.
Oh, so this is still part of the analytic.
Yeah. So synthesis always requires two or more objects. Okay, so I mean, technically speaking, in the context that we were speaking about, you could say that, the problem of being able to put my pen somewhere and the cup are two objects, right? But the thing you're synthesizing is a cup holder, or a pen holder, right? But if you keep the cup as the thing in your mind, fixed in your mind, right, and then you have a problem, then you can retool the purpose of the cup to do this new thing. Okay. Yeah. So that's the nature of synthesis, and I call that thing integration, right? So it's like, I mean, I think that a psychological example is probably more poignant here, and imagine I have a tragedy in my life, like my mother dies or my dog dies or something like that. Then I go through all of these horrible negative emotions and I'm really suffering deeply, right? In some sense, it feels like my life was like this, and then all of a sudden it's down here and it's going like this, right? It feels like, and this is time. Now, if you can take this and you can take this and you can stick these together so that you're a healthy human being again, that's synthesis. You're integrating the fact that some tragedy happened to you. In some sense, you're stronger before, right? Now, in the process of synthesizing these two things together, you have to do analysis on this thing, right? You have to figure out why, and what does it mean, and why am I so tired, and why this, why that, right? And you have to look inside yourself, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay, good. Other questions about that? Right, so the best way for me to draw this is sort of if I put a point here and I think about extroverted differentiation like this and introverted differentiation like this is like going into the object, and this is like what can the object do, okay? Now, synthesis is like I have these two objects and then I think about, well, what happens when I connect them? And you're gonna have a different idea than I would, right? So for example, if I give you this box and I give you this cup or this water bottle and I say, do something. Who knows what you're going to do? I'm a drummer. I'll go like this. Who knows, okay? But this is you're forming a new experience on the basis of two distinct objects or two distinct experiences that you're being given, okay? And you're making something fundamentally new. Yeah, and the reason why I bring this up is because in some sense it seems to me like these are the only two things you can do. Especially when you're digging for truth. Like if I'm probing something, all I can do is analyze it or synthesize it with something else. Now, I could be wrong about that, but as far as I know, this is Kant's idea, and I don't think anybody's proven him wrong yet on that one, but I'm ignorant on these things, so I'm speaking out of turn. Yeah, but I also have thought a lot about this, and it seems to me that that's the only things you can do. So, yeah. Okay. Now, the last point that I want to make is, I think, the most contentious point, and I want to regard religion as a theory of God, and I want to, in particular, think about Christianity as a question of what does God tell us? What does Christianity tell us about the nature of God? Like, what is it, if you were to think about Christianity as consisting of a set of fundamental laws about God, what would those laws be? What can we infer about God's nature on the basis of that? And that's the only way that I can orient towards Christianity if I'm to really adopt this scientific disposition. Right. Right. So this might not make sense. So when I say a theory is a concrete psychic content by which we form judgments about the subject the theory concerns, what I want to do is I want to think about, let's think about physics, okay? And I'm going to make it very simple, so don't worry. Okay. So in physics, we have 3 laws, and I don't care about the first and the third one. I mean, we have more laws, but it doesn't matter. I just want to write this one, okay? So, even when you're in high school, you learn this thing, okay? Well, in principle, you learn this thing, right? Where the force is proportional to the acceleration by the thing called inertial mass, okay? Now, this is a postulate about how things work, right? This means that if I want to move something, I have to push on it, and the rate at which the speed changes is proportional to the intensity that I push on it, right? So it's a linear thing here, right? There could have been a square, it could have been a cube, could have been a bunch of other things, doesn't matter. It's this, okay? This is a theory about how things work in some sense. Now, this is a postulate, but it's good enough to just say it's a theory, right? And so what I mean by this is, okay, so again, if I go back to this box example where I'm pushing something along the table, right? And I'm trying to form judgments about this thing. Well, the thing that I know is that this is true. It doesn't matter what I'm pushing along the table. So then what I do is I use this thing to deduce properties about what it is that I'm doing, right? So like I have to infer, like for example, a friction force because the thing doesn't keep moving when I stop pushing on it, right? So if I stop pushing on it and then it stops, then that means that there has to be something working in the opposite direction and so on and so forth, okay? Now, what I mean by this again, right, so now I want to talk about what it means to think about a theory of God, okay? And so what I want to do is I want to take this book and I want to think about it as consisting of symbols. Like this is going to be emotional objects that are going to induce in me pictures in my head that make me understand what it means to stand in relation to Him, right? So I think like, so I have this property when I think about my nature connected to God, right? And so every time that I quote to you something from the Bible, I think the right way to think about it is, this is pointing to a property of what it means for me to relate to God. Okay, now I have to make an argument as to why that's true, and I'm going to try and use the stuff in here to prove that that's the case empirically. But it's going to be for you guys to judge whether or not I was successful on that point. Okay, now when I say this is the fundamental disposition, what I mean again is sort of like in that scientific sense. Like what I mean is like I'm really trying to look at this like that's the way I want to look at it, just exactly like that. Okay, good. If you guys have questions, go ahead. I'm just going to check my notes, make sure I didn't miss anything. And the one other thing I want to mention is there's going to be this is going to open up a very big problem, because the way that contemporary society functions, especially in the Western culture, is to hypothesize that the scientific disposition and a theory of God, or in other words, religious theory, are orthogonal or independent or disjoint, can't be made to go together. Right? In some sense, I have to isolate the way I relate to God from my everyday scientific work. That's stupid and wrong. I'm going to be strong on that point. But we're not going to talk about that too much tonight. That's going to be in the series, hopefully. I don't know. We'll see what happens. Okay, good. First slide, only 20 minutes in. Great. Okay, questions? Did I lose anybody?
Sounds good.
Oh, very good.
I have something.
Yeah, good.
About at the end.
Oh, okay.
We might really get into it.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah.
This is going to be a tertiary criteria to analytic synthetic.
Oh, very good.
Something else. I would say it's in an analytic frame of reference, but it's a specific logical inference by negation.
Okay, well,
so,
we're going to have to talk more.
Yeah,
so make sure you note it down. I didn't actually make this comment at the beginning. I told him already, but the plan is I'm going to take hopefully this is going to take about an hour. Maybe it's going to be a little bit more. And then I'm going to just do questions. We can talk about things. So it has like that nice, the flavor of the Bible study where you get to, discuss as well. So anyways. Okay, great. So now we have our disposition. What we need is our central criterion to judge what we're talking about. Now, in mathematics, what that means is I have to define something. Okay, like if I want to do anything mathematically, And the first question you should ask me is, what are you talking about, right? You go into preschool, and they say, okay, we're going to do math. And you say, oh, well, what are we learning today? Addition. Oh, good. Yeah, see, so. And then what do they say? They say 4 plus 3, and they define it, and then you pick it up, and then you start running with it, hopefully. Or maybe you crawl with it. I don't know. Depends on your personality. Yeah, right, exactly. Yes, it's a crazy bowl bringing you around. Yes, wonderful. Okay, so anyways. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to start with the most important thing that I think is necessary in the context of Christianity, and I do think that it is the concept of a Christian, and in particular the idea of Christ, okay? Because what I want to do is I want to look, okay, so what I'm trying to do is basically argue, if I look inside myself and I understand my nature, the connection of my nature to God, then I understand what it is to be connected to God as a human being, okay? Now, in principle, Christ is the ideal facilitator of that connection, as well as being simultaneously connected with that thing. This is, in some sense, what we mean when we say he's holy God and holy man. He's the perfect mediator as well as the perfect embodiment of God as a human being. Okay, but if I adopt myself as the Christian man, then there, I think, are quite obvious parallels to, say, Abraham and Adam and David and Christ, in the sense that they are all central figures in the story of the Bible, or the theory of God in the Bible, in which one understands fundamentally what it means to be connected to God by being a man. Yeah. Okay. You look hesitant on this, so go ahead and you can push back on me if you.
I'm good.
Okay, good. So what I want to do is I want to read just a little bit from Collected Works 14 of Jung, because I think that he says some stuff in there that really helps frame how to think about yourself as like sort of an image of Adam, okay, and also an image of Christ, okay. And he's going to say a bunch of things. Don't worry about it. I'll explain it all. Okay, so here he writes. Whoops, I keep touching the microphone. They're going to hear that. Ruland defines Adam as a synonym for the aqua permanens, in contradistinction to Eve, who signifies earth. Water, which is the aqua permanens, is the prime arcane substance, and is therefore the agent of transformation as well as the substance to be transformed. And then he talks about a bunch of other times where Adam is identified as this object of transformation as well as to be transformed. Right? So in some sense, it's as though we are this imperfect structure, but through the process of this transformation, we become, say, more like God. And that process is mirrored in all of these men. Right, in Christ's passion, right, in David overcoming Goliath, for example, right, in Abraham, Abram becoming Abraham, yeah. Same thing with Jacob becoming Israel, where Jacob wrestles with God, and in some sense, Christ comes to redeem Adam. So in some sense, Adam didn't really get to be redeemed until Christ came. But if you look at it cosmically, it all happens simultaneously. So there you go. Adam is redeemed. Okay. Yeah, and there were a couple other quotes that this reminded me of that I actually wanted to point to. Oh, by the way, yes, I want to stress that me treating myself in this way right now it's a hypothesis, and I'm trying to show that by virtue of this sort of analysis that I'm doing tonight, right? And this is, again, trying to embody this scientific disposition, right? So I have this idea that if I do analysis on myself, I understand what it is to be Christian. Well, can I show that that's true, right? Yeah, but there are a bunch of other people who have this idea, so I think that I'm on the right path at least. There's a book by a famous samurai from the 16th century named Miyamoto Musashi, and in that book he says you should know the 10,000 by means of the one, and that's a theme that actually occurs very frequently in the samurai literature, where like what you do is you meditate on a single experience, and then you understand you intuit how all of those experiences are really just the same thing as that experience, right? So if, for example, you understand how to deal with tragedy by virtue of one tragic event, in some sense you know how to deal with tragedy as such, right? You know how to integrate it, you know how to cope with it, because in some sense that emotion doesn't change. The details of what induces the tragedy will of course change, right? But you understand the nature of tragedy by virtue of that single experience. And then I found this very cute in this book that I'm reading called Algebra by these guys, McLean and Berkhoff. They're talking about how to build a mathematical object that sort of represents all the mathematical objects that have that same property. Okay, so for example, if I want to know what the integers are, in some sense, I really just need to know this number. And the reason why I just need to know this number is because I can do this, and then I can do this, and then I can do this, and so on, right? So in some sense, you just need to add 1 over and over and over again. And it's really all you do is you need to know 1. I mean, you also need to know this, but that's the details. I don't care about that one. And so they say here, one may construct an element which is universal with some characteristic or some property, right? In the sense that this universal element maps uniquely into any other element with that characteristic. And so all that means is if I have a 1 and I want to send it to 5, I have to add exactly 4, and there's only one way to add 4, and it's like this. I mean, there are other ways. I mean, I can draw 4 1s, but it's still just this, right? The object which is universal in this way turns out to be unique up to an isomorphism. So that just means that, for example, if this is 5, I can also write this like this thing, and I can also write it like this, and so on, right? So it just means that there's a bunch of different ways to represent 5, right? But there's only unique, but all of these different ways are saying the same thing, right? It's just saying the same exact thing. It's just you take 1 and you add 4, okay? Oh, yeah, and so it might be helpful to understand or to take a step back and sort of think about this in the context of what I mean by thinking about myself as a Christian man, right? So if I take these ideas and I take a step back and I think about it, then what I'm saying here is, well, oh, good. So if I use the Bible as sort of a toolkit or a book that I can look into to understand the ways that I relate to God, then I understand what it is to relate to God, right? Because in some sense, everybody is going to relate to him in exactly the same way as me. If this is the universal thing, right? If this is the criterion. Well, and of course, since we're Christian, then we say, well, yes, of course, it's the thing. Now, we can get into debates about whether or not that's true, but then you're just being a Christian, so. In which case I've won, so there you go. Right, exactly right. And so as a consequence of all of these sort of musings, what I want to do is I want to take the one who worships the truth to be defined as the Christian man, or to be defined as Christian. Okay. Now, there's going to be some complications which we're going to get into, but the thing that strikes me the most deeply in this whole book, I think that the book of John is the most important book. And I'm probably going to think that until I die. And I think that these 2 verses are the most important verses in the whole Bible. And I'm probably also going to think that until I die. Right, and in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and he was with God in the beginning. And it's exactly on the basis of this that I say that being scientific is exactly the same thing as being Christian. And we're going to get into why. And it's exactly dependent upon what this means, what the Word is, okay? And what it means to be a follower of Christ. Right? Because if I say, well, I'm going to submit to Christ, I'm going to submit to God, I'm going to follow God, and then I identify the Word with God, then this process of analysis becomes inherently sacred. Right? So being scientific in some sense becomes inherently sacred. And so it's this criterion that I'm going to judge whether or not I've successfully achieved Christianity. Okay, questions? Good?
I think Jennifer was it.
Perfect. Oh, did I miss anything here? Let me look. Oh, did I? No, okay, good. Okay, so I have to make a comment on Matthew 22:39. I absolutely have to. There's.
I was thinking.
Yes, no, I mean, I was expecting you to think that, but it's okay. Yes, no, I absolutely have to because it's such a big deal, especially right now, and especially in the Southern Baptist culture. It's so deeply in the culture, as far as I can tell. When I was in Texas, they were talking about what it is to love. When now I'm here in Virginia, it's always talking about love. Doesn't matter where I go. When I talk to other Christians, there's always this question of love. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't deal with love. I mean, it's very, very important. But what we need to do is be very careful about what that means, okay? Because again, I'm saying that I'm defining the criterion of being Christian to be in pursuit of truth, which means that I can't just have an emotion about love and be like, well, this feels good, so it must be right. No. We have to be careful. We have to analyze these things, right? We have to make sure that we're using the word correctly. Because if you be too blasé about it, you be too laissez-faire about it, it's not clear whether or not, you're just trying to feel good or if you're actually loving, right? Because, well, I don't want to give political examples. Here's a good example. Your child comes inside, right? He hit his face. He's bleeding. He's crying, Now, you could naively be like, oh, I'm so sorry, please. Like, I'll hold you, I'll take care of you, everything, But, it turns out the child was outside taking a bat and hitting himself in the face. Well, you have to ask, what happened, And sometimes the love is, that was a stupid idea, wasn't it? Oh, good example from my personal history. I was 2. I was in the car, in the front seat of my dad's car. I was waiting for him to come. And to come to the car to take me to daycare or something like that. I saw something in the car, and it was a button, and I pushed the button. And it had a weird symbol on it. It had this symbol on it. If you know what that symbol is. Okay. I didn't know what it was. I pushed it. Yes, and then it popped, and I was like, ooh, that's interesting. I took it out, and I looked at it. It was red. I touched it. Yes, and what did my dad say? Well, first he laughed at me, as every good father would. And then, he says to me, well, you're not going to do that again, are you? And I was like, no. So, there you go. So, so this idea of love, I want to look at it a little bit more closely. And one of my favorite things to do to look at these ideas a little bit more closely is to go and look at what the Greek actually says and try and understand it etymologically, so we understand the sequence of ideas and try and get a sense for what did they really, what was their intention when they were writing these things down, I also want to comment quickly on John 15:17, which it doesn't matter. I don't actually need to read it. It says, "This is my command to you: you must love one another." Well, I'm here. I might as well just read it exactly. Yeah, this is my command: love each other. This is the New International Version, by the way, so it's going to change depending upon your translation. So, love is clearly important, but what we need to do is understand what it means. Okay. So, in the book, the word for love is agapao, okay? And this word, you probably hear it Latinized as agape, things like that. And it's the one that it keeps getting repeated over and over and over again. Now, the definition of it in its translation is to receive with friendship, and also to like or love. Okay. Now, the problem with English is that our notions of love are not based on gender, right? So we don't distinguish the conception of love between the fact that you and I are a man or the fact that you and I are a woman, right? Whereas I'm going to treat you very differently if you're a man versus a woman. Yeah. But I have this great etymological dictionary which tries to do analysis on where these words come from, and there's some evidence that it's broken down like this, agapa, which means to protect greatly, right? And so in some sense, this nature of love is, I live in a community and I care about the community and I want to preserve the community. So my love extends to you in this way that's like, God lives in our structure and we want to preserve our connection to him, and so I'm going to act towards you in such a way as to preserve that connection. right? Oh, yes, and Nietzsche actually makes some very poignant comments on this, I think. So in Beyond Good and Evil, which is BGE, number 260, he says this: the noble type of man experiences itself as determining values. Does not need approval, it judges. What is harmful to me is harmful in itself. It knows itself to be that which first accords honor to things, its value creating. Right? So if this type of man is to create love in some sense, what he's doing is he's understanding the worth of the thing that he is embedded in. And then he is acting in such a way in that community as to preserve that thing. Okay? It's not, my first reaction is raw emotional structure when this little kid comes in. No, my first reaction is like, oh, what happened? You know? And it's not as though you lack compassion. No. It's not as though you remove yourself from being compassionate. No, you have profound compassion. But you understand that these values which create and preserve this structure inside, in some sense transcend independent of the interaction, and acting out of those things is what it is to love. Okay. He makes another, I think, very beautiful point in number 293, in which he sort of juxtaposes this idea with somebody who is who wouldn't be able to act out of that space. Nietzsche's terms are, well, they ruffle feathers. He uses the notions of master and slave. I'm going to just quote it. That's how it is. So in 293, I'm just going to read the first paragraph. The other two paragraphs are important, but it's fine. It's good enough. A man who says, I like this, I take this for my own, and want to protect it and defend it against anybody. A man who is able to manage something, to carry out a resolution, to remain faithful to a thought, to hold a woman, to punish and prostrate one who presumed too much. A man who has his wrath and his sword, and to whom the weak, the suffering, the hard-pressed, and the animals too like to come and belong by nature. In short, a man who is by nature a master. When such a man has pity, well, this pity has value. But what good is the pity of those who suffer, or those who worse preach pity, right? So imagine you have somebody who is decrepit and degraded and empty, and then he says, well, I'm going to afford you pity. I want to offer you pity. And then the thing is, we have to ask the question, what good is that? What are you offering to me? How do I distinguish that between us wallowing in our sadness? How do we distinguish that between us? How do I distinguish that between you having the capacity to offer me something real, having pity, and this idea that in some sense you're feigning pity because actually you're quite happy that I'm suffering too, because you are resentful in the fact that you are suffering, right? And so if you are a man and you're in this space where you can't afford to offer really anything, then the question is, well, what is that? What good is that pity at all? How do I know if that's coming from a space where it's genuine, or if it's coming from a space where it is resentful? Right now, of course, what I'm doing right now is I'm saying there's this, and they're a million miles apart. But the fact of the matter is, there's some shading in between here, right? It's more complicated. You know, we can't always act out of this space, which is highly noble. You know, sometimes we do act out of this space. We're only human. It's okay, but the point here is, you know, if you're living in this space where you're like, everything's about compassion, right? Then there's no room for this, and there's no room for separation, and it's difficult to judge whether or not people are coming from this position or this position. And it's to this position's advantage, the negative position's advantage, to be covert about it, right? Because then you can get away with being resentful and pretend like you're not being resentful, right? And so, in some sense, it's sort of a compromise in which you try to get the best of both worlds. Does that make sense? Good. Yes. And so, because there's all this hullabaloo about this being such an important property of being Christian, I just want to make a comment here that in Matthew 22, 37, and 38, it seems to me that it's actually superseded 22:39. Is superseded by 37, 38. And I just want to read that just to give you guys the flavor. And again, right, so we're trying to discover the truth, right? So we're trying to take these words seriously. Jesus replied, love the Lord. Oh, yeah, so teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. Right? So Jesus says it's the first and the greatest, right? So in some sense, it's the thing that you have to get right first. If you don't get that right, then loving each other doesn't mean anything. Right? It's because you have to know that there's this thing that's outside of us, that's inside our communities that you're trying to preserve. So you act towards your fellow man to protect it greatly, right? And so this idea that that everything is contingent upon love, everything hinges upon this notion of love is true, but I think that we need to be very careful about what we mean by that. Because to me, especially in the way that it's used in English, it seems to me that it degrades into, well, I don't know. I don't know what to call it other than, say, resentful pity. I don't know what to call it except for something like that, right? Yeah. Questions about that?
So it seems that the way you're defining love here it hinges a lot on the desire to preserve. I mean,
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
But I think there's a fairly significant part of it that I think you went around, and I'm sure you agree with. I just want to make sure that.
No, I don't.
Okay. I think there also has to be the desire to improve, not just to preserve.
Yeah. So I shouldn't say preserve. Really, I actually wanted to qualify that and say propagate is probably a better word.
Okay.
Yeah, right. So
it's in the notion of maintenance.
Yeah, but not strictly maintenance, right? So when I say propagate, it's sort of like when God says to, I think, Abraham, be fruit. Oh no, he says to Adam and Eve, be fruitful and multiply. He says that to many people. It doesn't matter. It's not just, we're going to have 2 kids and it's going to be done. No, be fruitful, right? Be like the fig tree. Have many fruits. And this is also coincident with the parable of the talents, right? Where he says, if you have 10 talents, you better turn it into 20. If you have 5 talents, you better turn it into 10. If you have 2 talents, you better turn it into 4. Right? No. You don't just preserve it, right? The guy who preserves it, all he does is he takes his talent, he buries it in the ground, and then what happens? Gets berated, right? Yeah. So yes, thank you. That's a good point.
Maybe you're going to get into this too, but even in what you read, it says to love the Lord your God.
Amen.
So that to me probably introduces maybe a different type of love than is asked of us in other parts of the New Testament. And maybe you're going to deal with that later. But
I actually haven't thought about that. That's actually a good point.
Because I think that's what maybe people who suppose that love is the most important thing is probably what they would say to the idea that, you're supposed to love.
I hope
God.
that's true.
Yeah.
I hope that's true.
I don't know, man. I don't know how we'll do it.
We don't have somebody who's sitting here that we can ask who's the mouthpiece for this hypothetical group of Christians. Yeah. Christians. Okay. Sorry, I had to. God forgive me, It's fine. Yeah. So I can give you an initial answer on that right now. The initial answer, I think, is that the idea of that particular type of love is actually one that transcends all other types of love. And I think that we try to use this word to denote that, but we use that word for this. This is a human, and this is God. We use that for this connection as well as this connection. Now, that it's legitimate in this connection insofar as this connection is like this, where G's God. So like you are seeing the Spirit in this person, and this person seeing the Spirit in you, and you're acting out of that space. I think that it's legitimate insofar as that's true. But I don't think that this thing is always going to degrade by virtue of our nature. This thing is inherent to us. It can't degrade by its nature. It's impossible.
What you're going to have to deal with, those who might say that the practice of the horizontal love.
This one, yeah.
Is how you understand the nature of the vertical. And I don't.
Yeah, that's an
agree with
extroverted
that.
point of view.
But-
Yeah, that's an inherently extroverted point of view, and I would say that that's fine. You can define it that way, but you can't account for the introverted point of view, which is inherently like this, if you're going to define it that way. And what I'm saying is that if I define it this way, if I just think about this, then I have problems, right? But if I define it this way, and then I think about this diagram here, I should do this too. And I think about this diagram here, then I can account for both ways, okay? In which case, my theory is better than yours. So, goodbye. Okay, good. All right, so now we have to get to the question of why. So remember, let me go back to. So we have this hypothesis here, right, about this totality, this universality of being in me. Okay, so what justifies this point of view? And well, I'm not going to muse too much on this one because we're getting up there. So I just want to read a couple passages really quickly. And the thing, like I said, I think that John is the most important thing, and I think that the fact that the Spirit has been poured out upon us is one of the essential defining properties of being Christian, and I think that it's the thing that makes us aware of this connection. Okay, now I think I remember watching a rabbi on YouTube who says that there's something like this breath of life of God into Adam, and they regard that as the sort of spirit, their spiritual nature, which affords them this type of connection. But it's not so clear to me that that's, well, I don't know. I don't want to get into the theology of Judaism because I don't know too much about it, and I'm trying to restrict myself to Christianity. But anyways, it doesn't matter. I think that this comes from the Spirit, at least for a Christian. So let me read those passages really quickly. So John 14, 15, 21 is my second favorite passage in the Bible. So I'm going to read it. And it says this. Well, it's the night before Jesus is going to get betrayed. And people are asking him about how do I be better? And it doesn't matter. This is what it says. If you love me, you will obey what I command, and I will ask the Father, and he will give you another counselor to be with you forever, the Spirit of truth. The world cannot accept him because it neither sees him nor knows him. But you know him, for he lives with you and will be in you. I will not leave you as orphans. I will come to you. Before long, the world will not see me anymore, but you will see me, because I live. You also will live. On that day you will realize that I am in the Father, and you are in me, and I am in you. Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. He who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. And I especially really want to point to 17 and 22, where 17 he says he's talking about the Spirit of truth. It's what he calls the Holy Spirit. And then the other thing that he says is, I am in the Father, you are in me, and I am in you, right? And so you have like this sort of analytical structure where you have this universal structure of God, and then under that is Christ, and he's the mediator between us and God, right? And then inside of this is, again, sort of his image, right? And this is our connection to it. And it's by virtue of the fact that this thing is in us that we can go inside of ourselves and look at this thing. And that's what justifies this universal analysis, okay? Because this thing is what it means, is like inherent to being Christian, right? And it's through this connection that you get up here, right? Because it's symmetric, obviously. Come on. Yes, and then, and Luke 10:22 is also another really great passage that I think gives us another little bit of insight, in which Christ says, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows who the Son is except the Father. And no one knows who the Father is except the Son and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him. So again, this I'm in you, you're in me, and so on and so forth. And again, this image of this picture here. Okay. So again, I say here, the individual images will differ in their details. So in other words, what this looks like for you is going to be different than for me. But as mediators to the Father, they're all the same. Thus, we can inquire into this aspect of the Spirit to try and understand something universal about our being Christians. Right. So again, understanding the one, we understand the 10,000. Right. So now we have the motivation to ask, like, what are the universal properties of this connection? What does it mean for me to be connected to this? And then what does that imply for everybody, right? Okay, so as a consequence, you can think about this thing. You can think about this thing as being inside of you, but you can also think about this thing acting on you, as transforming you. Okay? So then my fundamental conjecture is this. The action of the Spirit in man facilitates perception of the structure as such. Right. So this again, what I mean by this is again going back to this idea of taking the scientific disposition as fundamental. What I mean by that is I perceive F equals ma because of the Spirit in some sense. What I'm saying is that the Spirit is the thing that enables me to see F equals ma. Right. And that's the only way that I think that I can look at it and to be able to regard this manifestation of F equals ma as something sacred. There's a guy named Mircea Eliade. He has this concept called hierophany, which is manifestation of the sacred. And when you have a realization, when you have a very deep realization, it really feels like something like God came upon you, right? Eureka, right? And I'm saying that the ability to have those moments is because of this connection. And that's the way this thing acts on you. Right? So when you have those very deep, profound insights, it's like the Spirit came alive in you for a moment or something like that. More alive than normal. Something like that, right? Right. And what I'm saying is that that's the defining characteristic of this connection. So if I know that that's the defining characteristic of this connection, then I can talk to you like, hey, remember that time you had a really crazy realization? And you'd be like, yeah, I remember. Oh, you remember? Yeah, I remember. Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, it has nothing to do with me. It has everything to do with this. Yeah, so we know order by means of the Spirit alone. The Spirit is the thing that allows us to perceive order, structure. Yes?
Is structure what allows symbols to... So structure is what allows us symbols to resonate.
Yeah. Well, so this isn't exactly right, but it's good enough. It's like the structure is out here, and then I have structure inside. We'll get to this in the next slide. I have structure inside me, and those things resonate with one another. Yeah, and then the way that manifests itself in me is the symbol. Yeah. Yes, and so then I say, yes, the Christian identifies this property as being equivalent with God and worships it. He places truth at the center of his life, all actions intended to be congruent with this principle. Right. So this is me trying to embody my truth, as the truth. No, you don't force your truth on other truths, but you see what I'm saying, hopefully. Yes. So I had to put this in here because I wanted to make this comment, but it's not important. The point here is, the realization here is that God is equivalent to the archetype of the transcendent. And what that means is that the thing that you perceive that transcends all things is God. Right? Christ is the thing that mediates that perception. And when you see something that has nothing to do with you in some sense, has everything to do with about the nature of being human. Like what I'm pointing to right now, we're looking at God. And Christ is facilitating this connection. Yes, this is the theory. Yeah. Right, exactly. And then I say here, we see this when we ask, what does the Logos mediate perception of? And then we compare that with Luke 10:22, which is what I just read you. Yeah. I don't want to get into, I was going to read collected works 8, but I don't want to get into the details of what an archetype is. It's too complicated. Okay, questions?
So, I'm a little curious about when you say archetype of transcendent.
Uh-huh.
Do you mean everything in the world of someone who already understands the Spirit, or is this quite literally everything on earth?
Yeah, so what I would say is that the nature of being Christian means that you can have a conscious relationship to that thing.
Sure.
If you don't have this connection, then you relate. Well, okay, so actually I'm not sure. on the one hand, you could say that these people relate to this thing in a completely unconscious way, which personally I think is correct. But you could also say that because they relate to this thing in an unconscious way, it's just as good as if they don't relate to it at all, right? And so for them, everything is profane. Everything has a lifespan. Everything comes into life and dies, right? And I mean, there's truth to that, but there's also truth to this periodicity of life. And so consequently, there is truth to things as being genuinely transcendent, right? And so, but if you say there's no such thing as transcendent components whatsoever, and there's just profane components, then life is strictly suffering and there's no meaning, and all you should be doing is running away from your suffering constantly, right? You know, eat and screw your way to death. Eat, drink, and screw your way to death. Which, I mean, for me, it's self-evident why that's stupid, but that's because I spent a lot of time doing those things. And, you know, if you don't believe me, well, you go ahead and try it. Okay. I have to point to the secular point of view because that's how it is. You know, we're living in a secular world. I'm not saying that's a problem. What I'm saying is that, you know, I'm going to have to translate for my... I have to do a little bit of evangelizing of my would-be fellow scientists. Okay. Yeah, so I want to be very, very clear on this. This is not to be viewed as a reduction. And what I mean by that is, for example, in evolutionary biology, you might be willing to look at, say, okay, let me put it like this. Let's say there's a group of people, okay, and here's the moon, and they relate to the moon in some way, like harvest season or something like that, and they only harvest when the moon is full, right? And then it turns out that the reason, according to evolutionary biology, why they only harvest when the moon is full is because the number of bugs that are out is small, because the full moon is too bright for the bugs because they have some kind of eye problem. I don't know. It doesn't matter. The point is that the evolutionary biologist, in some sense, would be satisfied with that question. Would be satisfied with that answer. But they ignore or they sweep under the rug the question of, yeah, but why did the people come to project this onto the moon? You know, like maybe there's something else that's in the environment that's just as consistent and just as constant. You know, or why didn't they start with realizing that there are fewer bugs? Like I don't know. There's a lot of problems with this point of view, right? But the idea is that these people are going to have a very sacred and deep connection to this moon, right? And you're not going to be able to ask, yeah, but like, why do you think this thing is a religious experience? Why do you have a sacred experience with this, right? Certainly, it affords you some survivability. That's definitely true. But why does it get projected onto the moon? Why isn't it getting projected on something else? You know, and you see these sorts of things all throughout life. Like human beings have this deep nature about them where they. What they really deal in is like emotions or something like that. And like the things that have the deepest emotional impact on them are things that they really regard as sacred, right? And you can see that with, I don't know, like if you want a trophy, like you had a really great memory, you have a picture or something like that, some totem, you know. It's not an idol, you don't worship it, but you have very fond memories, so you keep it around. And in some sense, that thing for you is a symbol. Okay?
Perhaps there's a high proclivity, regardless of your religious distribution, to seek synchronicity in all forms of a primitive religion.
Yes. Yeah. I think that's a property of being human. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, that gets into something else. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a property of being human.
I actually think that's the fundamental property of religion. I think it's finding certain symbols in nature and also self-sacrifice to find you, right? And so I don't know that it's, again, this doesn't really matter. Religion isn't always a theory of God. I think it's sometimes just a uniting force around.
It depends on what we mean by theory of God, but okay.
Well, how you defined it earlier.
Oh yeah, but what I would say is that when I say it's a theory of God, I also am trying to take up this idea where I'm trying to live it too, right? And so it's inherent to the way that we connect to one another as well. So it's not, again, like, if I go back to this picture, like, I really, really do not think this line exists at all. So whenever I say the word theory, what I really mean is I'm going to act in the world as though this thing is a fundamental property of being. Yeah. Okay.
low battery at the moment.
Okay, we're going to go quick. So it's obvious to the introverted point of view that all of this depends on this inner order, and that's this connection, right? This connection here. This is very obvious to the introverted person, right? Because you spend more time up here than you do out here, right? If you're out here and things are very profane, or, a lot of fornication, I don't know, whatever, then the nature of this connection, I think, is highly obfuscated. And incidentally, that's called decadence, according to Nietzsche. And incidentally, I think we're experiencing that now. Okay. And you can read the rest, it doesn't matter. Okay, so I just want to talk very quickly about what does it mean. And I'm going to skip all of this stuff. Again, I wanted to go through this sort of etymological thing to talk about what it means to do worship, right? Because I'm saying we're going to worship the truth. What does that mean, right? But practically speaking, what that inherently means is that, first of all, I'm going to know Christ inside of me, which is going to manifest inside of me as something like I must. Like there's something in me that I need to express as me, right? And I need to commit to that thing. And I can't look away from it. And this is like this idea of knowing thyself. There's something in you that needs to be expressed, and it's you, it's yours, okay? And it doesn't belong to anybody else. And Jung has this idea of individuation, and it manifests in a bunch of other places, okay? That's this idea here, okay? Then the outer disposition, in other words, how do we orient outside of ourselves? How do we commune, okay? And the idea is that we look at what is before we look at what we want to be. Right? So you deal with the facts first. You deal with the circumstance. You deal with the circumstances as they are, okay? And this is the only way you're going to be able to see Christ, right? Because you need to deal with what is, especially if you're worshiping the truth, okay? So as a consequence, we see and orient towards truth in our lives above all else, to follow it above all else. Through this process, we are reborn in the image of God, right? So again, I'm thinking about the Christ's passion. You pick up your cross, you struggle up the hill, and then you die. You die, but you're reborn, you come back to life. You transcend death in some sense.